Hi, I'm Jennifer Brown. I'm the executive editor at Sounds True, and I'm very pleased to be here today with Rachael Wooten, the author of our book, Tara, The Liberating Power of the Female Buddha. Rachael, please introduce yourself.
I am a Jungian analyst by trade, and I'm a Tara practitioner, and I'm a lover of intertraditional encounters, both inside myself and outside myself. And I wrote this book. It's very exciting.
It's very exciting. So we have I have to say, a pretty special bond as editor and author. I'll just confess that I have wanted to bring a book on Tara to publication ever since I landed at Sounds True over 15 years ago. That's no secret to our team. And when I brought this one forward, you know, it was an exciting moment, but it took a long time to get there. So part of what we wanted to do today was tell that story. I don't know if Rachel's giving herself enough of an introduction there. But you could read her bio and learn more about her. She's not only a Tara practitioner, but also empowered by her Lama to teach others to do Tara practice. This is always part of my motivation for wanting to publish something on the practice, because it is one of the visualization and mantra practices that's not like protected. In other words, you don't have to have an empowerment from a Lama to practice many of the Tara practices. They're considered open to all. So that is, as I say, part of my motivation. You know, do you want to say something about that, Rachael, before I go on?
Yeah, so I have been teaching these practices mostly to women. A few men have come along for 20 years, and to small groups mostly, but some of the people in the groups have been around for the whole 20 years. And what I find astonishing, and actually it's really my hope for everybody who encounters this book, but I'm always astonished at the teachings that arise from the people doing the practice in the practice. It's like it really allows the practitioner to have her own experience. And so there's nothing being dictated on high. You have to have this initiation, and you have to do this and this and this and this. You know? It's really accessible. And it's amazing what comes out of the hearts. And then the verbal spoken word of the people who do the practice. So that's just my hope, that other people will find this book will help them do the same thing.
It's always good to start anything with your intention, right? And your motivation. It's the first thing we do. Practice. Yeah. So I graduated from Naropa University with a Buddhist studies degree in 2000, and my graduate translation was of a different female figure, a historic female figure, although there's some debate about that, not in my mind and heart, whether or not Yeshe Tsojal, this figure, was a historic figure in Tibet. In any case, so my focus was on female figures in Buddhism, the divine feminine, how these practices were practiced, how it was always inspiring to me to find a female example of the divine, because it's very, very much missing, particularly an empowered one, right? In our Western mythos and spiritual traditions. So that's kind of how I came to Tara. I took a class with Lama Sarah Harding, who is an extraordinary translator and teacher, who was teaching at Naropa at that time. My mom and I actually took that class together, it was like a night class. We had a wonderful time. It's the only time she ever taught it. And thereafter, we formed a Tara practice group for that particular lineage, which is a Kagyu lineage. This is the cover of the practice text. And that contains within it this these verses, the 21 homages to Tara, or the homages to the 21 Taras, depending on how you want to translate it. And those form the basis for all these many different practice lineages. So a few years later, it would have been about 4 years later, I landed at Sounds True. And I was bugging Sarah, I want to take these recordings of your class. Let's make a Tara book. Let's, get this accessible practice, most accessible of the Vajrayana practices, out to people. And she's like, no, Rachel's already written this. This woman, Rachel's already written this book. I don't need to write that. And I was like, what? Okay, so put us in touch. And Sounds True's book division was quite small at that time. We were not publishing very many books per year. It's a big shocker to me coming into the world of publishing to discover that the Dharma was not necessarily our best-selling category, and we had to be super selective about what we were going to choose to put our resources behind. And the then sales director was like, well, maybe if one of these very, very well-known figures in Buddhism could write a foreword or something like that. I was like, all right, so I'm moving on. But then I never got back to Rachel. This is a learning curve for acquisitions editors. It's painful to reject people, and sometimes you just avoid it. So that's what I did in that case, and she never heard back from me, which I'm embarrassed about. So Rachel, I think you should say what happened next.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I have so many visual memories of all of this, because a lot of the emails that went back and forth, and those, how you reach out and ding somebody to say, whoa, do you remember me? Mm-hmm. Or at this beautiful retreat center on the coast of North Carolina, I can just see these live oaks right now sitting on the deck writing these emails to Jennifer. But somehow I didn't hear back from her. Don't ask me why, because it's not typical of me. I didn't take it personally. I just thought, yeah, I just got to keep moving on. And I mean, we don't have time to name all the amazing synchronicities connected to this book, but one of them was my good friend Jeanette Stokes connected me with Stuart Horowitz, who's got a firm called Book Architecture. He's a phenomenal editor. And so I hired Stuart. And Stuart and I got to work on this book and really, really, really reshaped it. I owe Stuart a lot. And so then as it started coming into this form, which I could see was infinitely better than what I sent Jennifer many years ago, I thought, I need to knock on this door again, but that was still floating around. Okay, so then many of you know this if you've been listening to these podcasts, but I have a deep connection to Judaism. I was not raised Jewish, but I have a deep connection to Judaism, and particularly Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi. May his memory be for blessing. And one of his rabbis, Rami Shapiro, came to North Carolina to the synagogue that I attended. And I thought, I've got to see Rami, because I knew he was connected to Zalman. So I did. And in the middle of this whole thing, I go up to Rami and I say, I'm a Zalman fan, and he lights up. And then I had also noticed his newest book, Holy Rascals, was out on the table in the foyer. And I looked in the, introductory section, and who had been his editor but Jennifer Brown. And so I thought, this is something. And so I said to Rami, I've written this book on Tara. And he just stopped right there. Literally, this conversation didn't last more than 2 minutes, if that. He said, Tara, you wrote a book on Tara? I love Tara. And I'm looking at this rabbi going, you love Tara? And then he said, and you will get nowhere with that without some help. You need to send me your manuscript, and I will send it to my editor, which I think was Chloe Prusowitz. And within 10 days, that whole thing had happened, and Jennifer and I were in conversation. And we went from there.
So that's right. So Holy Rascals, and Rabbi Rami is one. That's the Sounds True book that we did with him. And I love that book. I love Rabbi Rami, who, when I first met him, he had a table of people entranced telling them the story of Eve from a completely different perspective. Like he was just rewriting, the Old Testament before our very eyes, and we were all like, so he has definitely a strong connection to the feminine. The book division had continued to grow. I was super excited to see it come back around. I saw that it had been transformed actually by the hard work you had done with it. And here we had Rabbi Rami going to his marketing manager, Chloe, and saying, hey, can you send this along? So it was exciting to have it come back. And my own understanding, I think, had changed a lot in the intervening years for a variety of reasons. That is how the book came to Sounds True. We discussed it at the acquisitions meeting, and there is this feeling that, this is a subset of the Buddhist audience, not necessarily the broadest book. Jennifer, do you want to, move forward with it, despite the fact that it might not necessarily meet our, first sales projection benchmarks? And I said that I did, and Tami backed me up on that, as she told you when she interviewed you, Rachael, and bless her for that. Because now it is landing at a time when we need her more than ever. Yeah, we need her. And why do we need her? And what does it mean to say her? That might be nice to talk about. Like even who is Tara? How did she come to us in this time? You've got such an interesting way of thinking about that, of how she was preserved, how her tradition was preserved in Tibet.
Yeah, I when I really slow down and think about all this, it like right this minute, it often really brings tears to my eyes, because it's a little bit, it's nothing short of a miracle that this, whether you call it a legend, a myth, or something, but I feel like it's grounded in a true story that comes to us from, I don't know, 6th century India. I mean, here we are 1400 years later, and this story is alive and well. I mean, it is alive and very well. People really, really respond to her. And, I've thought a lot about her story, which, can read about in the book. But this I will say, I would go to all kinds of Buddhist teachings, and I would just be always not feeling so great that there were never any women teachers, and there were rarely tankas of female images. And, the women, even in the 20th century, weren't getting along so far in this tradition, and they certainly hadn't gotten very far in the other traditions. I mean, what's happened in the last 50 years is dramatic. But here is this story about this woman who defies all these conventions. And, I knew the story, and I would go to my own little Dharma places here and there, and I would say to them, where are the female teachers? And they would say to me, this is not unlike what was going on back in the 6th century. They would say, well, actually, gender is empty. And so it shouldn't really matter if your teacher is a woman or a man. Amazing. And I'm like, well, it actually does matter if my teacher is a woman or a man. They were using the very thing that Tara talked about in the 6th century to say it does matter, to say it doesn't matter. That's probably a longer conversation. But it's really clear to me, the practice itself, Tara, the practice of Tara, about this courageous woman who really did defy these conventions and claimed her own potential for enlightenment, which she reached. She is really an outer manifestation of an inner reality. She is that. So, if you're visualizing her, even in that subtle green body, but her story, you've got all that wisdom in that story behind it. Just looking at her is activating your own courage, the Tara within you, which is already within you, and your own enlightened potential. And, we desperately need that. I mean, we need everybody on board that we can have on board right now, women and men. So I think her story is, both her story and the practice are incredibly important right now, as much as they were 1400 years ago.
So for those who might be watching and are wondering, you know, what even is Tara practice? It needs some context here. You know, you'll hear her referred to as a Tibetan deity, or sometimes as a bodhisattva, but that's not quite right, because she may have been a bodhisattva when she took a vow to be of benefit to all beings, but then she purified her mind and heart until she attained awakening. So that means she's a Buddha. Am I saying that right, Rachel? Is that
right enough?
We're having this conversation about bodhisattva versus Buddha, and
Yeah.
what's the way to think about her. So it was a little bit of a throwdown for us to put, you know, female Buddha on the cover of the book, but I don't think it's inaccurate.
No, I don't either.
And the practice itself is a sadhana, or you'll sometimes hear it called a puja. If your local Buddhist community is offering Tara practice, they might call it Tara puja. And what this is a visualization practice where you call up a deity before you or within you. And there are, you know, sometimes incredibly detailed visualizations, mantras. But even before all of that, there's I love the way you talk about this in the book, Rachel, the container of the opening prayers and the closing prayers. Those are always there. You're always starting with an intention to awaken the heart, mind, and you're always ending with a dedication of merit. Somewhere in there, you're making offerings. You have really unique ways of talking about all of those pieces that I find beautiful and actually really meaningful to practice. So this kind of sadhana practice is not unique to Buddhism. There are sadhana practices in you know, Hindu Tantra. And gosh, we really can't go into the whole history of mantra practice in India and how it made its way into Buddhism and into Tibet. But that would be a whole other book. So yes, Tara is both prayed to as a being who's going to help you, right? She's got her foot extended out in that pose. It's like a leap to your assistance. And that's definitely how she is, you could say, worshipped. You know, you're praying to her for help. And then there's also an understanding of her as, you know, sort of a celestial Buddha, right? Something that is someone who's like fully awakened. Sorry, I'm sort of losing my train there. Do you want to pick it up?
Yeah, I do, because several things were just, you know, lighting up in my brain listening to you talk. You know, the practice to me, I think the reason it just grabbed me, because I said, I have practiced, I like to say this a lot, I'm 73 years old. The benefit of that is nobody can call me a dilettante anymore from going between traditions, because I've been practicing in several traditions now for 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. When you do that, you live into the ways these pieces connect and the way they have been around from as far back as we can remember. So when you do these introductory and closing prayers that you're talking about, Jennifer, you're calling in the beings and the bodhisattvas, right? And that calling in, this is a protected space you're creating. So the practices can be pretty powerful. And you really want to set up a protected space. And so you're calling in the enlightened ones and the lineages of teachers, et cetera, et cetera. In my experience, it's no different than if you were doing an indigenous ceremony and you're calling in the 7 directions, and you're calling in the protectors, and you're calling in the spirits of the directions, but you're always calling on them as the helpful, compassionate helpers, right? And that is a holy container. You don't do a ceremony without setting up this protected space. And that's what those preliminary prayers are doing. Then, you know, in Judaism, the idea of kavanah, people say sometimes I pronounce that wrong, but I think that's right. The setting of the intention before you do anything is the most essential piece of anything you do in Judaism. So this intention that we set, that we want to awaken for the benefit of all beings, which is part of those preliminary prayers, is what makes the whole practice run, is that motivation, right? And so
the source code.
yes, and
Yeah.
yes, and this comes out of this tradition. So you've got the protected space, you're setting this phenomenal intention, then you just really wish that all beings could understand the interconnectedness of all life, which of course indigenous people have always understood. You're just wishing we could all catch on, right? And then after you've set these amazing,
Maybe so.
yes, maybe so, yes, amazing container to do this practice, all right? And then comes this visualization. And, you know, this is hard to get. This is, I think these practices actually were designed to get us past our rational mind, which again, we Westerners, we people of the Enlightenment and rationalism, oh my God, let go of my rational mind, whatever, anyway. But I think that's what these practices do. And so when you begin to visualize Tara, again, with that courageous story and all those, her right foot forward, that whole image, but you're imagining her in a subtle body of light. And that is something we have within us. We also have that subtle consciousness, the place where things just come to you, the place where all of a sudden you understood something you never understood before and it didn't happen with your rational mind. That subtle realm is, you know, Tara is really the queen of that realm, right? So when you're visualizing that, whether you understand it or not, that subtlety begins to wake up inside of us, right? And then these mantras are amazing. I mean, they're Sanskrit syllables. Sanskrit has never been a spoken language. It is only a spiritual language. These resonant syllables, the vibration of those syllables, actually carry the essence of the deity. So when we're chanting the mantra of Tara, it's like we're saying over and over and over again in this inner vibratory sound level, wake up, wake up, wake up. Wake up to your own true nature. I mean, that's really, you know, what we're doing. And we've got Tara there.
Just so you're no audience, you just received a new English language mantra from Rachael Wooten. Wake up, wake up. Recognize your own true nature.
Yeah. So, yeah. You know, this is one of those things, you got to do it. You can't understand this because of listening to us talk. You know, you have to do it. And then if you do it, you have an experience. And then the experience makes you more curious. And I really hope, you know, I really love it when people trust their experience. And that's what's wonderful about being in groups, because people can talk about their experiences. But, you know, I want to say this, and then I'll give you a chance to say something else, Jennifer. Quite some time ago, it came to me that, of course, this really makes sense, that since everything is energy, that Tara is really a process. She is a process. She's a moving, changing, evolving process. And so we are going to engage with her through these ancient practices that people have done for well over 1,000 years, because they have a brilliant method that allows us to get in these subtle spaces. So we're using the framework of this ancient practice, and we're letting her work on us now in our age, and we're going to evolve the practice forward. I mean, that has to be how it works, or else it's just a dead archaeological thing. And this is not that. It's a fully energized, evolving, phenomenally beautiful process.
Thank you. Thank you for saying all of those things. I love thinking of Tara as a process. The same thing's happening to me, where as you talk, like things are sort of lighting up, and like which thread to follow. I want to say something about colors. You were moving your hands in a circle as you're talking about the practice, and I kept seeing a mandala, right? And so the mandala is really like a map of a three-dimensional sort of celestial palace. But when you see a mandala, you see a painting of one, there's always 4 quadrants and a center, and they are 5 colors, right? Blue, yellow, red, green, and white. Each one of those colors has energy associated with it. And by being green, Tara is this karma energy, it's called. The Sanskrit, different use of the word karma than we would typically think of. And the idea of karma energy is that it's swift. It's associated with air, swiftness, and is, I've heard lamas say this, that's part of why Tara is green, right? Yeah. But then there are these many other colors of Tara. And that's indicative, you can see as you read through the book, what their sort of flavors are, what their particular energetic signature is, if you will, for these different colors. Now there are colors beyond those 5 mandala colors in Tara, and I think that points to some of her roots, her pre-Buddhist roots, that are fascinating to me. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. And yes, and I do want to say that the color scheme is pretty fabulous. Too, we can come back to that in a minute. But it, and I thought about this, Jennifer, with you. It's like, I think you came to Tara through Buddhism. I came to Buddhism through Tara because I was really tracking on the Black Madonna. And really involved in indigenous practices at the time. And it was through both of those routes that I came to Tara. So that really sort of validates that path.
I just love that.
Yeah. So, early on, I was just getting all these teachings from my Tibetan teacher, Lodrö Rinpoche. I had the benefit of some other teachings with other lamas, but he was really my primary teacher. And what I was learning was really all through the Tibetan lens. But because I had this earlier background and I had some pretty profound dreams, which has always been a thing for me. And again, this is, I have said this to you, Jennifer, before, I'm such an intuitive person that I just follow those intuitions. And so sometimes it's hard to rationally explain why I did this or other. But at some point it was like, no, I had to understand where she came from. And it was also because I had read this praise of Tara, the 7th Black Tara, that referred to her dissolving the magic circle and the hexes of the enemies. And I'm like, that's just shamanism 101. I've got to get to the bottom of this. That's where Sarah Harding came in for me. She was the one who gave me all the scholarship and information to check that out. And turned out, of course, to be true. But then I had also read this book many years ago, The Myth of the Goddess, The Evolution of an Image, that talked about the impact of Inanna, the Sumerian goddess, from 4000 BCE. I could practically recite this paragraph by memory because I got so excited when I saw it, that how she had influenced Judaism, Christianity, and specifically Mahayana Buddhism. And then I'm like, yes, I had intuited this thing correctly, right? So when you really dive into the wonderful scholarship and the fact that those Sumerian tablets were discovered and translated and so on and so forth, you can really see it. I mean, Inanna was referred to as the green one. She had, I'm not saying there's a direct correspondence to any particular.
I know, but somebody out there listening, can you please, make this the focus of your scholarship for the rest of
it? Exactly.
We'd appreciate it. Thank you.
That'd be great. And they all have the same names: the Queen of Heaven, the Evening Star, the same names that Anana was called, or the same names that Mary is called, or the same names that Tara's been called. Yeah, and so she is just this fabulous. I mean, I'm thinking of her rising out of the lotus, from the Avalokiteshvara story, but she's the blossoming, you could say, the blossoming of all these early traditions, which were her roots. And there is scholarship for that, for people who are interested.
There is, there is. Would love to see more. It's always a little gratifying to me that all of my cohort from Naropa, we all graduated in 2000, and we thought we were doing the most weird thing ever. And now, look at what has happened in our world with mindfulness meditation. And my feeling has been, there was incredible work done to legitimize sitting practice, and a little more research more recently into compassion practices, those kinds of focused attention practices. Their scientifically measurable impact on our brains and our neurology. And I think the research on these kinds of practices is catching up, right? You talk about this, how much practice soothes your nervous system, and visualization is very complicated use of your mind. It can be intimidating, but there's also a very natural. I think it's intimidating because we think it's something we don't know how to do, and in fact, we actually do it all the time, right? So
you can also simplify it too.
You can simplify it. So I was kind of coming to that if even a 20-minute practice of sitting and chanting and supplicating the goddess, you might not want me to use that word, but
no,
we can think,
I'm just thinking of something I really want to say, and
I'm going to finish that thought and say that there are, you always say this, that we just need to think of her, right?
Yeah.
We just need to think of her. I want to say this before I forget, because it's been on my mind thinking about this talk, and that is there's one of the Taras, one of the red Taras, and her visualization that you describe in the book. So each one has a bit of a special tweak on how you visualize her, right? And you can tell me which one this is, but you visualize red vajras, dorjes, these thunderbolt shapes all around you as a protective kind of screen, and create this, container of safety with this red Tara within it with you, right?
Yes.
Powerful sense of protection from that in a time when we're all feeling a little vulnerable. I know I do when I go out in the world. So that has been just like a moment, like there's this fear of these vajras. Like that's one that's come to me, and I haven't cultivated it. I just, edited the book with you. But that's, I think if you read this book, there are those images that will hit you and for whatever reason, that can then serve as a help.
Yeah, I was out on a walk this morning, and I will say, as many of us are, and this is related to the thing I really wanted to say, that one of my deepest sources of suffering right now, which I can't quite find some perfect, remedy for, is the cruelty of the current administration. The fact that we, everybody says we're all in this together, but we're kind of really not. And so I and many of my friends are having trouble sleeping, and it's that kind of pervasive sense that there are people with not very good intentions right now, and they have a lot of power, and that's just true. I don't apologize for saying that at all. So when I was walking around the park this morning, and I was pretty happy, whatever, it's beautiful, this mantra just starts reciting itself in my head. It was the 19th white Tara, and her mantra just, I mean, it takes me a while to hear it. Wait a minute, something's going on up there. And I hear this mantra and I go, oh, that's the one who actually works on your deepest sorrows.
Mm.
And I thought that would be something else I would really want to say is, this is different. This is really different if you've never had any exposure to this. So there's a little bit of, not that you have to believe anything, but that you sort of have to suspend disbelief.
Mm.
And if you kind of just go with it as a curiosity and as an exploration, you'll find the things that will happen to you like that. What's something that really means something to you. And so I think the thing I really did want to mention is the story of Avalokiteshvara.
Yes, let's close with that.
Yeah, that's another one of the kind of origin stories of Tara, that he in sort of his heroism decides to go into the lower realms and rescue everybody there, and he'll do that until whatever, and if he should just even flinch, he would shatter to 1,000 pieces. And I'll make it shorter. That's what happens. He goes into the lower realms, and my sense is that what is shattered is his heroic delusion that he can really do as much as he would like to do to eliminate suffering, that he has that much power. And I think the amount of suffering that he actually encountered just was completely overwhelming. So the story goes, he shatters into 1,000 pieces. And the old story was his sort of father figure, Amitabha, put him back together. It just came to me somewhere out of the blue that it was his community that put him back together. So I'm staying with that. This is all in the book too. But after he was put back together, he wept like a lotus pond. And out of that lotus pond comes the lotus, and Tara blooms from that lotus. Well, some people say Tara's born from the tears of his compassion, but my sense is, that really what happened is that he was so blown up, and that his old view of the world and how everything worked, and maybe even his spiritual frameworks got blown up, completely shattered. And out of that depth of grief and loss, and what in the world am I going to do? He's got some people who are looking after him. Again, you have the indigenous vision quests with the elders waiting for you to come back. And out of that grief, he recognizes Tara. And I just want to say that because I feel like what's happening in this pandemic is that whatever traumas people have had, even if they thought they had been resolved, are resurfacing. And there's a lot of shattering going on, and a lot of people questioning their spiritual beliefs, because that typically goes with that level of shattering. And so I think the story of Avalokiteshvara, just like the story of Tara, is this endlessly amazing, it's like the scriptural text that you can interpret and reinterpret, that we can see. And I think I might have mentioned this to you, Jennifer, in a conversation earlier. You don't get from your heroic idea of how you're going to save the world to this phenomenally empowered spiritual awakening without going into the depths of the lower realms. You just don't. And so shattering may be part of the spiritual journey. Oops. How do we do this? Sorry about that. It maybe is the perfect bell to say, yeah.
I think so. That was our mindfulness bell. Yep. We probably have to end. That's so beautiful to take that metaphor for ourselves right now, right? Because I think many people feel incredibly moved to help. And it is shattering to realize how many beings are not going to be able to be helped. I can take joy in the members of my family who are okay right now. And then it's so, it's all held within this knowledge that there's so many people suffering. and that's not going to end. And so the idea that out of that sorrow, that splitting apart of ourselves that happens, you know, like how could I be everything to everybody to help everyone, right? That's what he's trying to do.
Exactly.
Out of that, Tara arises from our tears and says, you're not alone.
Right.
No, that's beautiful.
And that we cannot know about that with our rational mind. And I think for everyone, as Tara arises, it'll be a little bit different. And so as we continue to share with each other our experiences, we're all Tara, right? And then we can see Tara manifesting in countless different ways. And that is, again, evolving the tradition forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, for writing this book, for your dedication, despite, you know, editors who don't get back to you. And
now, wait a minute, don't be talking about my editor. She's the best editor a person could ever want. You can't be talking bad about my editor.
Well, thank you.
I bow
and,
to you.
I am really happy to be here with you on Zoom today. I'm grateful for the time and space to do so, and may it be of benefit.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you.
Thank you.